And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, see that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, and pestilences, and earthquakes, in divers places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Matthew 24 verses 6-8, King James Version. These words were spoken nearly 2,000 years ago. Yet for many people watching the world today, they feel surprisingly current. Turn on the news and you will see a world filled with uncertainty. Wars and rumors of wars. Political tensions. Economic instability. And nowhere do these concerns seem more concentrated than in the Middle East. Again and again, global attention returns to the same region. A region that has shaped the course of civilization for thousands of years. A region that also occupies a remarkable place in the pages of Scripture. In recent years, one location has appeared repeatedly in discussions about global security. The Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, it seems like nothing more than a narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman. But appearances can be deceiving. This small waterway is one of the most strategically important locations on Earth. A significant percentage of the world's oil exports pass through it. Global shipping routes depend upon it. And whenever tensions rise in the Middle East, the world's attention quickly turns toward this narrow passage. But what if there is another reason this region continues to capture our attention? Not because of oil. Not because of politics. But because of something much older. Something that reaches back thousands of years. Back to the very beginning of the biblical story. Because while the Bible never mentions the Strait of Hormuz by name, the lands surrounding it appear again and again throughout Scripture. From Genesis to the prophets to Revelation. The same region repeatedly emerges at critical moments in biblical history. Is that merely a coincidence? Or is there a deeper pattern hidden within the biblical narrative? To explore that question, we must first understand exactly where the Strait of Hormuz is located. And why it matters. The Strait of Hormuz lies between modern-day Iran and Oman. It serves as the only maritime entrance and exit to the Persian Gulf. Every day, enormous tankers carrying energy resources pass through this narrow corridor. The waterway itself is surprisingly small when viewed on a map. Yet its importance is difficult to overstate. A disruption here can affect economies across Europe, Asia, and North America. Stock markets react. Governments issue warnings. Shipping companies alter routes. For such a small location, its influence is truly global. But the significance of this region did not begin in the modern era. Long before oil tankers crossed these waters. Long before modern nation-states existed. This region was already part of a story that would shape human history. And that story begins in Genesis. Many people have heard of the Garden of Eden. Even those who rarely read the Bible recognize the name. For believers, Eden represents humanity's beginning. A place of beauty. A place of innocence. A place where mankind walked with God. In Genesis chapter 2, we are given one of the Bible's earliest geographical descriptions. The passage speaks of a river flowing out of Eden and dividing into 4 rivers. Among them are 2 names that still exist today. The Tigris and the Euphrates. For centuries, scholars, theologians, and historians have wrestled with the implications of this description. Could Eden have existed somewhere near Mesopotamia? Could the biblical narrative be rooted in a real geographical landscape? No one knows for certain. And Scripture does not provide enough information to identify Eden's exact location. Yet what is fascinating is that many theories continue to point toward the same broad region. Mesopotamia. The cradle of civilization. The ancient world surrounding the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. A region connected geographically to what we now know as the Persian Gulf. This alone is enough to capture the imagination. But the story becomes even more intriguing when we look at recent archaeological theories. In recent decades, some researchers have proposed an idea that sounds almost like something from a lost world. Before sea levels rose thousands of years ago, much of the area now covered by the Persian Gulf may have been dry land. A vast plain stretching between ancient river systems. An environment capable of supporting human settlement. One of the scholars associated with this theory is archaeologist Jeffrey Rose. He suggested that the basin of the Persian Gulf may once have contained what he called a Persian Gulf oasis. According to this idea, communities may have lived there long before rising water submerged the landscape. To be clear, this theory does not prove the location of Eden. Nor do most archaeologists claim that it does. But it reveals something remarkable. The same region that appears near the opening chapters of Genesis continues to attract serious scholarly interest today. The more researchers study the ancient Near East, the more attention seems to return to this area. A region situated between some of humanity's earliest civilizations. A region linked to the beginnings of agriculture, trade, settlement, and culture. Whether one accepts the Persian Gulf oasis theory or not, it highlights a simple truth. This region has mattered for a very long time. Far longer than modern headlines would suggest. As Genesis continues, the narrative introduces another famous event. The Tower of Babel. Humanity gathers together in one place. United by language and ambition. According to Genesis 11, they begin building a city and a tower reaching toward heaven. The project represents mankind's attempt to establish greatness apart from God. The result is judgment. Languages are confused. Peoples are scattered. And the nations begin to spread across the earth. Many scholars associate Babel with ancient Mesopotamia. Once again, we find ourselves in the same geographical neighborhood. The same ancient world that lies behind so much of early biblical history. Then comes Abraham. One of the most important figures in all of Scripture. Genesis tells us that Abraham began his journey from Ur of the Chaldees. A city generally associated with southern Mesopotamia. The Bible's story of redemption begins not in isolation, but within the context of this ancient world. A world connected to the land surrounding the Persian Gulf. A world that would eventually give rise to powerful kingdoms and empires. And among those ancient nations, one stands out in a particularly interesting way. A nation called Elam. For many Christians, Elam is not a familiar name. It rarely receives the attention given to Babylon, Egypt, or Assyria. Yet it appears surprisingly often in Scripture. The first mention occurs in Genesis chapter 10, sometimes called the Table of Nations. There, Elam is listed among the descendants of Shem. Historically, Elam occupied territory in what is now southwestern Iran. Not far from the northern shores of the Persian Gulf. Archaeologists have confirmed that Elam was a genuine civilization with a long and influential history. Its cities flourished for centuries. Its kings fought wars. Its culture interacted with many of the great powers of the ancient Near East. Yet what makes Elam particularly interesting is not merely its history. It is the way Scripture continues to mention it. The prophet Isaiah refers to Elam. The prophet Jeremiah refers to Elam. And in Jeremiah chapter 49, we encounter one of the Bible's most fascinating passages regarding this ancient nation. Verse 35 declares, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might." At first glance, this sounds like a message of judgment. And indeed, it is. But the prophecy does not end there. Only a few verses later, Jeremiah records another statement. One that surprises many readers. Jeremiah 49 verse 39 says, "But it shall come to pass in the latter days, that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord." Judgment. Then restoration. Destruction. Then renewal. It is a pattern seen throughout Scripture. And it raises an interesting question. Why does God continue drawing attention to this region? Why does Elam appear not only in historical passages but also in prophetic contexts? While scholars disagree about the details, one thing is clear. Elam occupies a unique place within the biblical narrative. And as history moves forward, Elam becomes increasingly connected to another name. A name that would eventually become one of the greatest empires the ancient world had ever seen. Persia. And it is with Persia that our story takes an even more fascinating turn. As biblical history moves forward, the story of Elam gradually merges into something much larger. A power that would eventually dominate the ancient world. Persia. For many people today, Persia is simply the ancient name for modern Iran. But in Scripture, Persia is far more than a geographical reference. It becomes one of the most significant empires in the entire biblical narrative. And remarkably, Persia enters the story not primarily as an enemy of Israel, but as an instrument used by God. One of the most extraordinary examples appears in the book of Isaiah. More than a century before the rise of the Persian Empire, Isaiah recorded words that continue to fascinate scholars, historians, and believers alike. Isaiah 44 verse 28 declares, "That saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure, even saying to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, and to the temple, thy foundation shall be laid." Then, in the very next chapter, Scripture becomes even more specific. Isaiah 45 verse 1 says, "Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him." What makes these verses so remarkable is that Cyrus had not yet been born when Isaiah wrote them. Yet here was a future ruler being identified by name. And not merely identified. He was assigned a role within God's plan. Centuries later, history unfolded exactly as Isaiah had described. Babylon fell. Persia rose. And Cyrus issued decrees allowing the Jewish exiles to return home. The rebuilding of Jerusalem began. The temple was restored. And a new chapter in biblical history opened. For many Christians, this remains one of the most compelling examples of biblical prophecy. But what makes the story even more fascinating is that Cyrus does not exist only within Scripture. He also appears in the archaeological record. In 1879, a discovery was made in the ruins of ancient Babylon. A clay cylinder covered with cuneiform writing. Today it is known as the Cyrus cylinder. Many historians consider it one of the most important artifacts from the ancient Persian Empire. The inscription describes Cyrus's policy toward conquered peoples. Rather than forcing every nation to adopt a single culture or religion, Cyrus often allowed displaced populations to return to their homelands and restore their places of worship. While the cylinder does not directly quote the Bible, many scholars have noted striking similarities between these policies and the events described in the books of Ezra and Chronicles. Suddenly, the biblical account is no longer standing alone. Ancient archaeology confirms that Cyrus was a real ruler. A ruler whose actions align remarkably well with the broader historical picture preserved in Scripture. This does not prove every detail of biblical history. But it demonstrates something important. The world of the Bible was a real world. Its kings were real kings. Its empires were real empires. And Persia was one of the greatest among them. Yet Persia's role in Scripture does not end with restoration. Centuries after Cyrus, the name appears again. This time in one of the most discussed prophetic chapters in the Bible. Ezekiel 38. For generations, students of prophecy have examined this chapter carefully. The passage describes a coalition of nations involved in a future conflict. Among the names listed is one that immediately stands out. Persia. Ezekiel 38 verse 5 states, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. For centuries, interpreters have debated the meaning of this prophecy. Some see it as entirely future. Others view it symbolically. Still others believe parts of it may reflect multiple historical patterns. What is undeniable, however, is that Persia appears within the prophetic discussion. The same region associated with Elam. The same region associated with Cyrus. The same region associated with much of the ancient world surrounding the Persian Gulf. And this raises a question that continues to capture people's attention today. Why does this region keep appearing? Why does Scripture repeatedly return to this same part of the world? Perhaps the answer lies not only in prophecy, but also in geography. Because geography often shapes history. And few places demonstrate that reality more clearly than the Persian Gulf. When most people think about the Persian Gulf today, they think about oil, energy markets, and geopolitical tensions. But long before the age of petroleum, this region was already one of the world's most important crossroads. Thousands of years before modern shipping routes existed, merchants traveled through these waters. Ancient civilizations exchanged goods across vast distances. Trade linked Mesopotamia with the Indus Valley, the Arabian Peninsula with the Fertile Crescent. Cultures separated by hundreds and sometimes thousands of miles became connected through commerce. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of extensive trading networks operating throughout the Persian Gulf region during the Bronze Age. One civilization frequently mentioned by researchers is Dilmun, often associated with present-day Bahrain. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe Dilmun as a prosperous trading center. A place where merchants exchanged copper, precious materials, textiles, and luxury goods. Historian and archaeologist Harriet Crawford has written extensively about Dilmun and its role in ancient commerce. Her research demonstrates that the Persian Gulf was not a peripheral region. It was a commercial highway. A bridge connecting civilizations. In many ways, the region fulfilled the same function thousands of years ago that it fulfills today. It connected worlds. And perhaps that is one reason its importance has endured. Empires have changed. Governments have changed. Technologies have changed. Yet the geography remains. The same waters that carried ancient merchants now carry massive oil tankers. The same region that linked ancient civilizations now helps sustain the global economy. And this brings us back to the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow passage. A strategic gateway. A location whose influence extends far beyond its size. Every day, enormous quantities of global trade pass through this corridor. Its importance cannot be measured merely by geography. It must be measured by impact. Which leads us naturally to another biblical text that has fascinated readers for centuries. The Book of Revelation. When many people think about Revelation, they immediately think about beasts, judgments, and apocalyptic imagery. But there is another theme woven throughout the book. Commerce. Trade. Economic power. In Revelation chapter 18, we encounter a dramatic picture of economic collapse. The chapter describes merchants mourning, trade networks failing, and commercial wealth disappearing almost overnight. Listen to the language. Revelation 18 verse 17 says, For in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster, and all the company in ships, and sailors, and as many as trade by sea, stood afar off. This is a remarkable image. Shipmasters, sailors, merchants, cargo, trade. The chapter devotes considerable attention to commerce. In fact, many readers are surprised to discover that Revelation 18 discusses economic systems almost as much as political power. Now, it is important to be careful. The Bible does not mention the Strait of Hormuz. Revelation does not identify modern shipping lanes. And Scripture does not provide a map of contemporary geopolitics. Yet it does describe something strikingly familiar. A world connected through trade. A world dependent upon commercial networks. A world vulnerable to disruption. For most of human history, such a system would have been difficult to imagine. But today, it is simply reality. A disruption in one region can affect markets around the globe. A conflict in one nation can impact supply chains on multiple continents. The modern world is interconnected in ways previous generations could scarcely comprehend. And because of that reality, passages like Revelation 18 often feel more relevant than ever. Not necessarily because they predict specific events, but because they describe themes that resonate deeply with the modern experience. This brings us to an important question. Are we witnessing the direct fulfillment of biblical prophecy? The honest answer is that Scripture requires humility. The Bible never mentions the Strait of Hormuz by name. It does not identify modern nations in a way that eliminates all debate. And it does not provide a detailed timeline connecting every headline to a prophetic passage. Yet at the same time, it is difficult to ignore the recurring pattern. Again and again, Scripture returns to the same broad region. Genesis, Elam, Persia, Ezekiel, the Persian Gulf, trade routes, the ancient Near East. The pattern is there. The significance is undeniable. The interpretation remains a matter of careful study. And perhaps that is exactly how it should be. Because the ultimate purpose of prophecy is not speculation. It is preparation. It is not given so believers can obsess over every headline. It is given so believers can understand that history is not random. God remains sovereign. Empires rise and fall. Nations appear and disappear. Markets fluctuate. Conflicts erupt. But God's purposes continue. And that truth leads us to the most important question of all. How should Christians respond in times like these? Jesus himself gave the answer. The same passage that opened this video contains the key. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, see that ye be not troubled. Notice what Jesus did not say. He did not say believers would never witness conflict. He did not promise a world free from uncertainty. Instead, he warned that such events would occur. But then he added a command. See that ye be not troubled. Christians are called to be informed. But not terrified. Watchful. But not fearful. Aware. But not consumed by anxiety. The purpose of studying prophecy is not to create panic. It is to strengthen faith. To remind believers that God remains in control even when the world appears unstable. And perhaps that is the most important lesson we can take from this journey. From Genesis to Revelation. From Eden to Elam. From Persia to the Strait of Hormuz. The Bible repeatedly draws our attention to a region that has shaped human history for thousands of years. A region where civilizations emerged. Empires rose. Trade flourished. And prophecy continues to spark discussion. The Strait of Hormuz is never directly mentioned in Scripture. Yet the lands surrounding it appear again and again throughout the biblical narrative. Whether these connections represent simple historical patterns or something more profound is a question each reader must consider. But one thing is certain. This region has stood at the crossroads of history for millennia. And even today, it remains one of the most influential places on earth. If this study has helped you see the biblical world from a new perspective, consider subscribing for more Bible-based explorations of history, archaeology, and prophecy. And let us know in the comments. Do you think the Bible's repeated focus on this region is merely historical? Or does it point to something more?